All right, and we are back. Welcome to episode 6 of the FrameCAST. And in this episode, we are joined by Amelia Chapman, the creator behind Ultra Processed Minds, a new documentary coming soon. Amelia, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. I can't complain.
All right, that's great to hear. Off the back, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your time before you came to Emerson and what you did before and what you're doing now.
So obviously a high schooler. I was a theater kid. I've been making films since I was 10 years old, though, with my iPod Touch, making iMovies with my cousins. And so that kind of just continued into high school with like multiple creative projects. And I was always very creative. And so I kind of went down the social justice documentary route when I captured the Black Lives Matter protests in my hometown. And that's how I got into Emerson. And from there, I've been just kind of like discovering my love for documentary. I had one really great professor who really opened my love for it. Now I'm just kind of going into the social justice route.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. And I'm curious about how you yourself got into that. Was it the Black Lives Matter movement in particular, or was it something before that?
It was more so I knew I wanted to take on a minor, and I wanted to kind of tell stories of people who like voices aren't usually told, and I originally wanted to do that through like short narrative film. But I took on a peace and social justice minor, and once I had that first documentary class, I was like, wait, this could actually be a really good medium for me to pursue this particular subject. And I also really want to travel. Like, that's a big part of my career goals, and so I know you can really travel for documentary. I just figured it would be a perfect route to kind of combine all those things.
Yeah, and I'm curious about Ultra Processed Minds. Tell me a little bit about that in particular. What is it about?
So when we hear about ultra processed food, we always hear it in a context of it's bad for your body, you should go on a diet, it's bad for your pancreas, all these things that it's bad for your physical health in your body. But what we don't talk about is how it actually negatively impacts your brain in ways that you may not even realize. Things like excess anxiety, depression, brain fog, crashing in the middle of the day. People don't necessarily tie these things to food, and so a lot of different things, not just like sugar and the chemicals they put in the food, but also dyes can affect your mood and have like ADHD symptoms. And so kids and young people often get like medicated when they don't need to be. And so kind of opening this subject from a non-diet culture perspective, I feel like would be very important, and also maybe even be more motivated to make people more motivated to change their ways when they're not like, there's a sense of shame when it comes to bodies and diet culture, but when you are doing it to make you feel better in your brain so that you can focus more and feel a little bit cleaner in your brain when you wake up and have more energy throughout the day, then I feel like the education there will be more of a motivation factor to better people's habits.
Okay, so the way I see it, you're trying to use this not only to raise awareness about the current damaging chemicals that are already in our food system, but how people can also live better lives. Does it also focus on alternatives, like alternative lifestyles, and are those ever subjects in your documentary?
Yeah, so it has to be fairly short. So it is mentioned different ways that we can kind of like work around this, because it's focused on young people and how in this economy it's really hard to eat healthy. You can't just buy Whole Foods all the time because it's super expensive. So I've been talking to a bunch of different people, getting interviews on their kind of just like their perspective on how to work around this. And there are definitely ways that you can. It's mostly just like integrating it into your everyday routine is the hardest part often.
Yeah. What are some of the major themes that you hope to explore with this project, or you hope that people get out of it?
Mostly just the idea that knowledge is power. It's like I'm very strong on like the no preachiness of this documentary, which I know that it could kind of have the potential to come across that way. But with the idea of just like the more that you know, do what you will with this information. So that's going to be like a big thing. And then the other part of it is just like kind of recognizing that it's hard to change habits, and especially with the affordability of everything, to really go through a young person's perspective, which is why I'm doing student interviews, so we can kind of see how the students themselves are actually thinking rather than just hearing adults talking from their expertise. So mostly just like a sense of knowledge, and then from a young person's perspective, and then no preachiness, no eating disorders, no like keeping a very positive mindset, and that there's a sense of possibility in this.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated about, the difference between how documentaries these present stories versus how films present stories. It's very different because with documentaries you're dealing with real people. These are people who are, you know, at the end of the story, like it doesn't just wrap up. They also have to deal with their everyday lives. What was the research process like for you?
It's kind of a long one. I wasn't planning on doing my capstone on ultra processed foods. I just knew I wanted to do a documentary, and so I over the summer I kind of went down a rabbit hole with like one YouTube video being like, "You're eating pre-digested food," and I was like, "What does that mean?" And so then it went to like audiobooks. I was just kind of doing work around the house and listening to some like really interesting studies that I was like, I can't believe we're not talking about this. And I noticed that a common theme was people would sprinkle in, and it's bad for your mental health, and then they'd leave it, and I'm like, talk more about that. And so that's why I'm talking more about it. There's not a lot of solid science when it comes to mental health because there's such a broad spectrum. There's so many different issues and so many different people, but there is science there pointing to this, and so that's why I'm talking to a variety of different people, like a nutritionist, people who are investigative journalists, people more in food science, people in food dyes, because they all have like a different perspective in that, and they all have something to say about how it affects our brains.
Yeah, and I'm curious, sorting between all those sources, which sources were the most valuable to you between the investigative journalists and the bot? And I imagine you also spoke to a lot of scientists who are researching this as well, or was that a part of your research too?
Not speaking to them directly, but the more like scientific research I was more reading about, or doing the audiobooks for. But I think some of the most important information I've gotten, I had an interview with Michael Moss, since he was the investigative journalist, and so he had a lot of insight with the internals of the food companies because he talked to them directly. He went into their factories and their studios, and they talked to him. And I mean, he wrote several books about this, and so his perspective, and also just the way that he talks about it, the way he frames this information, very simplistic, very real life example. Like, I think that's going to be a really valuable tool in the documentary.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like as you were like researching and compiling all this information, and after your and going before going into this, did you have any sort of internal expectations for what you wanted to achieve, and how did those expectations change throughout the process of making this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just like when you make a capstone, things come up. And also when you're a student, not everything goes to plan. I had a little more Zoom interviews than I would have liked, which, on their Zoom, I can't necessarily set up the shot the way that I like. But the things that were in my control, it's been going fairly well. I've been trying to keep like a very like clean look for it. And that's been good, but I think a lot of that is going to come mostly into post-production, coloring, just the way that I like set up all the information. So I think the more altering of the vision is going to come in post. I have another big shooting day tomorrow, so we'll find out how that ends up going. But yeah, I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, but it's working out so far.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you could talk about any one subject in particular that stood out to you as you were making this documentary, one that you can remember fondly, and why did they stick out to you?
Like a one particular just like
An,
fact or series of
an
information.
interviewee or person you were interviewing for this.
Yeah, well, Michael Moss, he was great in that, like, one thing that he said that I think is pretty relevant that we may not even realize is the way that grocery stores are set up. He went into how there's a whole psychology for it, and so they'll put the necessities, the dairy, the eggs, the milk, in the back or the sides, but all the ultra-processed foods in the middle, and then they'll put certain colorful sugary foods at eye level where kids can grab them and point to their parents, but they'll put the, like, sugar-free plain oatmeal in, like, the bottom right corner. On the caps, on the ends, they'll put their big chip deals and large vats of soda, and the produce is going to be like kind of pushed off to the side. So it's like all stores are set up in that way. And so as he's explaining it, I'm kind of like, wow, I can't believe I never noticed that he was actually lined up for to appeal to my psychology, essentially. And so that I think is super interesting, and totally wanted to share that.
Yeah. And one interesting point that you mentioned before is that you had a lot more Zoom interviews than you expected. A lot, I think any filmmaker would be irritated with that limitation. I'm curious about how you and your team have been managing to work with that so far and integrate like the Zoom stuff and still make it seem visually interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of that is coming down to the B-roll. I had one interview where I know that I'm barely going to be able to use the image because it was just so choppy. And so because of that, not just because of that, but we got a lot of interesting B-roll of a lot of up-close foods and in the grocery store. I kind of want to get some like drone footage of like college campuses if I'm able to legally. And then I'm going to get some like general B-roll of college students and studying and stuff because it is kind of about young people. So that's going to hopefully make up for the lack of visual there. And then I'm also having some of the, when able, them record like in like a voice memo on their end so that I have a more like up close their sound so it's not all digital when I'm recording it on my end. So just little things like that. It's just I don't have the budget to go to Los Angeles or New York or the UK to interview some of these people.
Yeah, I know. I'm just always fascinated because like a lot of student films, documentaries, we don't really have unlimited money. We don't have like the budgets of studios, so we always have to think on our feet and find up with. And I'm always fascinated by the ways in which people find creative solutions to problems. What would you say was the biggest problem you guys had to handle on set?
Um, Luckily, no major issues have come up yet that I would call it like a problem. I think the closest thing would be I have a set of student interviews tomorrow, and I had a hard time like configuring people because I also wanted them to somewhat know each other, so the dynamic was more a conversation. And so it was mostly just like I had to shuffle around a lot of groups for their availability, and I ended up having to cut 2 sections of the interviews. They're originally going to be 4, now there's 2, which is fine. It still works, but then we have to like move around the schedule and everything. So it's just kind of difficult getting like that many people, but it worked out.
Yeah, I'm curious, like looking back on your own personal journey with this documentary, when you first started and where you are now, how would you say your thinking and this overall experience has changed you as a filmmaker?
That's a really good question. I feel like it's sort of given me like not to be dramatic, but just like that cold water of like, oh man, this is like, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of stress, it's a lot of just technical things, which obviously I knew that. knew that going into the film industry. This is just a thing. But when it's my baby, essentially, it's like there's more stakes. It just feels a lot more stressful. And so I also realized that I hate producing. I've been doing a lot more producer work than I normally would for a short film. I'm a director and more on like the editing side and like directly in production. Producing is not my forte, so I'm learning that I really should not go down that path because I find it very stressful. But I also find it very rewarding. Like unfortunately, the bigger the stress, the more relieved and rewarded you're gonna feel once that part is done. So yeah, I don't know. And also just like most of my experience is with narrative. I've done documentaries in the past, but not usually like this large scale. So it's just learning how to go through an unscripted content like that, especially for a capstone.
Yeah, I know. It's real. That's really beautiful and succinctly put. And it's often interesting because like when I've often made my short films, I've just uploaded them on my YouTube channel, and they're really nothing. They're made on like a toilet paper budget. You know what I mean? Absolutely nothing. And I often think about like what this would look like if it had $100 million. Do you ever think that about any of the projects you've worked on the past or even now?
Definitely, more so just like, oh, how I would be able to actually book like proper spaces for these interviews and pay the people involved and all that type of thing. But I'm grateful for my family and things who have supported me in funding the documentary through like GoFundMe and things like that. So it's especially frustrating just because this is the first semester that Emerson pulled the $300 budget for BA capstone films.
What?
So nobody's working with a budget essentially, and it's just a bad timing that I happen to be the semester that I do it.
Yeah, that's crazy. I'm curious though, like that experience, just raising, you just going out there and knowing that you had to essentially raise money on your own. Did you have any support? What was that like navigating, the complexities of film financing?
Really, I'm just privileged to have a lot of like extended family and family who are willing to share the GoFundMe on their end. So like I'm just extremely grateful for that. But I'm like, oh man, if I didn't have like this extended family who knew of my passion since I was a literal child, like this would look very different. And $300 from the school like that goes towards a lot. That goes towards feeding your crew, transportation, like all of these things. And even more so for narrative because you have to worry about like props and the dry cleaning and all these things. So I'm just honestly, I'm just in a place of gratefulness because it could have been very different.
Yeah, that's amazing. Out of all the members of your crew, who would you say, which teams in particular were the most crucial for you, to develop that, key relationship with to get it right?
Yeah, so a lot of the thing about this documentary is I purposely wanted to keep like a small crew because I knew that a lot of the interviews would be fairly intimate. I didn't want to have a huge crew bombarding that space. But my AD Kira has been great with a lot of like last minute scheduling things. So that's been great. And then I had my sound recordist Jack pulled through at the last minute and really saved us. And I was like, thank you so much for that. Honestly, everybody has been really great. My friend got me a gaffer for this weekend. And originally all the gaffers I know are doing the LA program, so I'm like, hey, so who can help me out? And Aiden pulled through, and I'm like, thank you so much. So honestly, it's been like a mix of everybody like chipping in the ways that they can, and yeah, I'm just grateful for everybody who's been a part of this project.
Yeah, I'm also curious about the scale of this project. You described it as being very intimate, local. Is it mainly going to be focused on what's going on in Massachusetts, or are there going to be certain threads that audiences could connect to, like a larger problem in society?
It's definitely America, US based because like while we are in Boston and Massachusetts specifically, it is a countrywide problem, and so I don't think in any part of the film do I mention location. I think Emerson obviously is mentioned because it's an Emerson capstone, and it's suggested that the college students are from the Emerson area. The ones that I'm interviewing are from this area, but it's definitely more of like it's presented as a countrywide problem because all of the protocols, the lack of regulations around chemicals put in food compared to other countries, like that's all American. That's all the United States.
Oh yeah, especially with what's going on with the EPA. We got RFK in charge of our health. Let's
Yeah.
right around perfect time, just when we're seeing a rise of bird flu.
Yeah, no, great timing.
Oh my god, the stories around that guy around animals is insane.
Oh man, really?
Yeah. Sidetrack. Did you know that, like, all right, crazy story. One time in 2018, RFK heard that while he was governor of New York, that there had been a dead whale that had landed up on Long Island Beach. So he personally drove there with a chainsaw and then like decapitated the whale and then put it on his truck.
That's a
for some
crazy
reason.
instinct to like. I'd want to drive and go see it, but not with a chainsaw. Like that's an
I know,
insane
like-
mission.
And that guy's in charge of our health department now.
Wow.
So I feel like films like this, documentaries, are going to become even more popular now because of that.
I hope so. The documentary distribution game has been rough the past year or so, or longer than that. It's all true crime and celebrity docs, but hopefully some people will want to watch it.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a space for documentaries and media that is very focused on health. And you're right. I have noticed that a lot of health media is very focused on the individual, your individual health, not about like larger consumer trends or the fact of why people eat unhealthy food, about why most Americans eat unhealthy food. That the reason for that is never explored. But it's really good that you're doing that with this documentary.
Yeah, I hope it offers like a new perspective that people haven't heard before. Everyone I've told it about, it seems like kind of surprised but interested. So I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah, I think that it's because like the food industry, like it's so popular, but the behind the scenes is just so nebulous too. Because like the fact of the matter is that the food distribution network is so globalized. Resources come in from all parts of the globe, so there's no way to really track whether something is humanely extracted or or if it's good or how much chemicals are being put in that because there's just all this backroom dealing without the consumer involvement, and I think that uh, yeah, systemically that can create a lot of dangers. But yeah, enough of that. I'm curious about what's next for you after ultra processed mines, and what do you hope to do in the future?
Well, I'm graduating right after, so that's crazy. But yeah, so I want to get a job, hopefully in post production, whether that's like assistant editing job or like an in-house editor. That'll all just depend on luck. And yeah, so I want to move to LA within the next couple years, but I have to do things like saving up and get a new car and all of that crap. But I'm going to be in Boston for this summer, which I'm super excited for. First summer in Boston. And so I want to get a job, hopefully, in the industry. I'm doing a internship doing like museum installations now. And so that's been super interesting. So I don't know if I'm going to continue with them. But essentially, I'm keeping an open mind and applying everywhere that I can. But documentary production would ultimately be the goal. And then I want to do like freelance editing on the side because as much as I love editing and I'm good at it, looking at a computer screen for 10 hours a day should not be my full-time job because I went into film to connect with human beings, which is why documentary calls to me so much. So ideally, I want to do a mix of both and then be able to travel for those things, like being paid to travel the world. That sounds excellent.
Yeah, I definitely sympathize because like I grew like I was born in Houston, and my family we moved to my dad actually moved us to India, and throughout my childhood I spent my summers like traveling all over the world. So I definitely think that like travel and just experiencing different cultures can provide us with like such unique experiences. And I guess, yeah, that childhood traveling is what really got me into telling stories, because the only reason why we are attracted to other worlds is because we can't see them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it absolutely widens your perspective of the world. And I'm very thankful for all the traveling I was able to do as a kid, too. And it's a privilege, honestly.
Yeah. What are some other places you hope to go in the future?
I really want to go to Amsterdam. I kind of want to live there for a bit, which is weird because I've never been there. It's weird to want to live at a place you've like only seen pictures of, but like there's like a calling in my soul. I'm like, okay, I would absolutely fit in there. And like I'd love to go back. I'd love to go to Ireland. I've never been, only the airport. I'd love to go back to Scotland. I'm willing to learn a new language as long as it's not French or German. And yeah, I just really kind of want to see as much as I possibly can. I'd love to go back to Italy. That was one of my favorite countries I've been to. I didn't see enough of it is the thing. Um, yeah, and South America, honestly, like anywhere.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm curious, where can people see or follow ultra processed minds?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be putting it on my website whenever. Yeah, I don't. I'm working out like the film festival stuff. I might just do a release, but it's my website ameliachapman.com. Fairly easy because it is my first and last name. But then that also has a link to my Vimeo page and a bunch of different highlights, and so it'll definitely be on there.
Yeah. Do you guys have any plans for screening it at Emerson?
Yeah, so May 9th is the BA screenings. They're doing a couple other mini screenings before that, but the main one is May 9th, and it's in the Bright family screening room.
Oh wow. So yeah, any Emerson students, you guys know where to go. Yeah. And what else? I'm curious about how your overall experiences working on other projects has given you the knowledge and ultimately how do you believe that that experience has culminated with ultra processed minds? What have you taken from other projects, and how do you believe you've applied it to here?
I think some of the, like, every other documentary project I've done has been a class project. I took a couple different semesters with Jessie Epstein and her documentary classes, and so that had a bunch of different types, like observational, exposition or exponential, and then like final projects. And so I was able to kind of pursue a bunch of different, like, short and long documentaries, personal and impersonal, and so that kind of gave me the experience of I think cutting together a documentary, unscripted content with a bunch of footage is like harder than you'd expect. And so having done those projects, I'm like really able to cut this documentary than if it was my first time doing it. And then as for working on other projects, the AC work I've been able to do, the sound recording, unfortunately no gaffing experience, which is why I desperately needed aid in the gaffer. But like it's been able to help me set my set up my sets better. The interviews, I have like a vision and I know exactly how to execute it, and so when I have people on my team, I'm able to give direction a lot easier than I would have if I like hadn't done those positions before. And I've also done a lot of editing positions with other people, and so I've developed a flow of working with deadlines, which has definitely been helping because there's a very deadline heavy project.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. Everybody, you know where to find Amelia's documentary, Ultra Processed Minds. This has been the FrameCAST, episode 6. See you later, Boston.